microphone does this thing every goddamn time.
Correlating activity.
I was not ready today. I had a feeling that somebody was going to back out. So.
Your mic is sounding very robotic.
Yo, mama sounds robotic. Is this better?
A little bit.
Is it better now still?
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe it's because I'm talking like this. Oh, what the fuck, dude? Alright. Are you here? Everything good? Oh, somebody's talking to you. You good?
Yeah, I'm set.
Alright, so today we're going to go back and kind of recap a lot of stuff because it's been a while. And we're going to end on something new. And this last thing is very hard for me to completely understand. And that's why I need you and Sanchez both to kind of help me. Right, it's not that I don't get it, it's that I don't think I'm understanding it as completely as I could. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
This messaging up to the cortex doesn't happen continuously. Instead, hippocampus sends information in discrete units, kind of like data bands. These events have a very peculiar and characteristic shape when they are detected on the underlying electrical activity of the brain. If you stick an electrode inside the mouse hippocampus while it's sleeping, the recorded signal would have certain bursts of activity, kind of like little hippocampal fireworks. The overall activity.
So this one we're going to focus on like the functions and the waveforms specifically.
Would suddenly go up and then decrease like a wave. And on top of this wave would be a very high frequency oscillation, kind of like a ripple on the water surface. This is why such events were called sharp wave ripples. And ever since these hippocampal explosions were discovered, they pose a question for researchers. At first, they were hypothesized to play a role in memory, because when the mouse was placed in a novel environment, the rate at which sharp wave ripples occur the following night increased compared to the familiar environment. But more convincing evidence came later.
So that just means that when you're forming memories, new places, your sharp wave ripples, or your brain is going to do more computations to create a cognitive map of that area or new memories. There's less computations that have to happen when you're in a familiar place.
Sure.
When it was discovered that artificially silencing the sharp wave ripples that is interrupting this activity from happening leads to
Okay, so then 6:45 is where we're going now.
Remember how during the day, place cells were firing in sequence, representing the trajectory. In fact, each spatial memory, such as the event of running through the maze and getting the reward, can be thought of as a sequence of activating place cells firing one after another in well-defined order, encoding the taken path. If you compare the activity of place cells during the daytime at times of active foraging with their activity during sleep the following night, you will see something very interesting. Trajectories the mouse was taking during the day, at night recapitulated during the sharp wave ripple. And that means that the same place cells were activating one after another as if representing the same trajectory. Only their order was reversed, and the timescale of the entire thing was much smaller. It's as if the mouse brain was rewinding back the mental tape. This phenomenon was given the name hippocampal replay, or fast reverse replay to be exact. As we now believe, such reverse replay of a particular event is what plays the major role in consolidating the memory about ordered reactivation of place cells, representing past trajectories, is what helps to strengthen the synaptic connections between the nerve cells, encoding this particular memory in the cortex. Now, it's important to understand that replay and the sharp wave ripple is not exclusively a nighttime event. Yes, they are most abundant during the slow wave or deep sleep when there is a process of active consolidation going on. But they can also be observed at daytime, especially during periods of immobility. For example, as the mouse successfully finds its way through a maze to a tasty reward and heavily sits down to enjoy it, the hippocampus fires up a replay of that path's place cell sequence to consolidate this memory and better find the route next time. But sometimes you would see really weird ripples whose content doesn't correspond to any of the past experience. Instead, place cell firing sequences encode the path the animal would take in the near future after the ripple was observed. And when that route was taken, you'd see that unlike reverse replay, place cells firing in this ripple were arranged in the correct order as they would be firing during the run, from start to finish. This led to the hypothesis that hippocampus uses this preplay or fast-forward replay in decision making.
Well, this is also that
it is
that idea of projecting your reality or projecting your consciousness forward into time. Right, we've talked about that before.
I think we watched that portion of the video weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yep.
I'm having like a hard time grasping those measurements. So this wave that's being fired off that's just a simulation of the trajectory of the mind? Or is that an actual physical wave? That's a physical wave.
It's the rate in which these hippocampal cells are firing. So that's the firing rate.
It's a pulse.
Yes.
Pulsing.
Yes.
Good. And then that's detected prior in the projection, and then when it physically does it, it matches its projection. Yeah?
Yeah.
Boof.
So here, this will help you a little bit, because this is kind of where this is 212 recorded place cells of an area, right? Of this specific area. And this area, then they put it in a computer simulation like this, where these place cells cover every inch of this area that the rat could be walking. So everything has been mapped already.
Okay.
Right. So then this is the rat.
Let me show you a movie or two. So what you're going to see here
This is when it's moving.
is the rat in the task.
And all of
this is
those
real time.
flashes,
And the rat, you can see,
all of those flashes are the hippocampal place cells as it's moving through this terrain. So this is its brain representing where it is in space.
Right. Now, for clarification of the direction that the little 2D mouse icon is facing, is that based off of its head direction cells?
Yeah, well, also because they can see the rat.
Okay.
But the place cells, they know where they are based on the head direction cells. There's
Sure.
a computation that happens there. So then, where's that, 47. So remember this video? So all of these squares basically is a place that food can be. And they do thousands upon thousands of trials in this thing. So the food is never in the same place twice, technically, right? It could potentially be in the same place twice because there's only so many places it could be, but it's not going to be this top left one at the start of the trial, then the next one, so on and so forth. It's way more randomized than that. Right? So at some points, there's how it says novel path. It's a path that this rat has not taken, so from one point to another point. But what you're going to see here is that it's tracking. That was the normal, but then that pulse there. And if you look at the time loop at the bottom, this is compressed, right? This is that sharp wave ripple. This is milliseconds, if not lower than that, of these firings in your brain. And this rat's projecting a route to the food, and then it just did a secondary route in a different direction. Like it was contemplating which way it was going to go. And then after it fires, it fucking goes there. And then it does it again. It's like, do I want to go down there? That seems like a good idea. Maybe down here, and then it goes.
And he's still projecting in that movement.
I don't understand. What do you mean?
So while he was like traveling southwest on the screen, he's continuing that projection is still occurring. Those activations were still there. So there's activations in that rat icon, and there's also projections outbound while it was in motion.
Okay.
Which is really interesting to see that actually coming to fruition. Like, I might be in motion, but I'm still looking ahead where I'm trying to go, or the supposing of where I want to be.
So all of that is to say that the place cells are the representation of the world around us as we see it, as we interact with it. It's really based on grid cells and border vector cells and head direction cells, because we don't have direct access with reality the way that most of us think we do. All of that is besides the point when I'm saying that we operate inside of this cognitive map where this place cell is representing where I am, but then I can project my consciousness across this map inside of my head. That's how I can like walk out of this door without moving. And I can imagine myself getting up and walking out and then going down the stairs and then walking to my car. I can do that. That's what that rat is basically doing there. Now, this next part is where we really needed Sanchez more so, right? But this is going to start talking about like frequency modulation, because there's something in the brain, it's called Theta rhythm, and it is like a continuous pulse inside of the hippocampus, right? And then all of these other signals, like that sharp wave ripple, is actually sitting on top of the theta rhythm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's literally how we do any type of communication. That's how all of our...
That's the human refresh rate, bro. That's fucking insane.
So
holy shit.
Is hippocampus, a truly miraculous structure which encodes memories and constructs maps of external world. How it does it still remains a mystery, but recently there have been some fascinating progress towards decoding the hippocampus. One of such aspects is the inner hippocampal clock, called the Theta rhythm, which makes a bulk of computations possible, and the ticking of this clock is vital for memory encoding and retrieval. In this video, we will explore what the theta wave is, how it's generated, and the role it plays in the functioning of the brain. Without further ado, let's dive straight into it. Ever since Hans Berger discovered the alpha wave by putting electrodes on top of a person's head and measuring the electrical activity in what's now known as EEG, scientists have been interested in the phenomenon of brain waves, these oscillatory patterns of brain activity. By now we know quite a zoo of different brain rhythms with different frequency bands. Today I'd like to focus mainly on the theta wave, which is localized to the hippocampus. This characteristic wave-like pattern, with a frequency between 4 and 12 Hz, is recorded by sticking an electrode inside the hippocampus and measuring the voltage between...
What?
I'm so sorry to pause you on that, dude. Is there... So he just showed all the different wave patterns inside the head. Are those all pretty augmented to their own thing? Like the prefrontal cortex has one, the hippocampus has one, and so on?
I think some of them are... I used to know this. I don't want to answer that question. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know how to answer. I know one of them is sleep, and I know another one is when you're like actively trying to do shit. So I think it's when you have a frequency, right? You have a waveform. You have to do what's called like a Fourier transform to be able to extract all of these different waveforms from the original frequency.
Okay.
So that's a Sanchez-esque talk,
Right.
where like because he's literally a fucking scientist and he does this for a living. So there's another video that I wanted to go over with him specifically where it talks about these Fourier transforms and shit, because this is just like the preface, right? We're gonna watch this. Me and you are gonna like kind of get an understanding, and then when I talk to Sanchez, I want to see if I'm gonna watch this video again, and I'm gonna see if my understanding, like,
what up?
You know what I'm saying? Or if I like see something I missed before.
A point in extracellular space and the ground electrode, usually somewhere at the top of the skull. This voltage arises from the summation of currents which reflect synchronous synaptic inputs. That is when one neuron sends information to another through synapses. If there is a huge number of neurons surrounding the electrode and sending signals simultaneously, then these tiny individual currents add up and the resulting voltage becomes large enough to be sensed by the electrode. Note that this measures an overall activity of a huge number of neurons surrounding the electrode. It's like putting a microphone above the football stadium. It's not possible to discern when and what individual people are saying. You can only hear the overall activity of the crowd, which would increase every now and then when one of the teams scores. And similarly with neurons. In the intact brain, this rhythm is generated in a special structure called medial septum. It contains what's known as pacemaker neurons, which rhythmically discharge between 4 and 12 times per second. They have special proteins, hyperpolarization activated channels, which allow ions to flow into the cell at regular time intervals, thus generating a rhythmic activity. It's actually the same mechanism which makes your heart beat. Pacemaker neurons send their connections to the hippocampus, thus sending the rhythmic output and giving rise to the theta wave. This way, the activity of hippocampal network waxes and wanes, following the rhythm of a conductor, the medial septum. Just a quick note. It's worth mentioning that the reality is a bit more complex than that. Particularly, in 2009, it was discovered that even if you isolate the hippocampus by cutting the connections from the medial septum, under certain conditions, theta rhythm can be generated inside the hippocampus itself. It indicates that the hippocampus contains a neuronal machinery that is enough for the generation of intrinsic rhythm. Like an experienced orchestra can self-organize to play in harmony, even without the conductor. In this scenario, rhythmic activity arises due to the interaction between excitatory and inhibitory neurons through a negative feedback loop. The mechanism is quite elegant, but it's a bit beyond the scope of this video. If you're interested, I encourage you to check out the references down in the video description. The current view is that the hippocampus, although it has an intrinsic oscillator, something that can generate rhythmic activity, normally follows the beat of medial septum. The exact details of this process are still a matter of debate, but without a doubt, this rhythmic activity of hippocampal network is essential to carry out a bulk of computations. So let's
You froze, bro.
Still?
Yeah, you're back now, but nothing you said after you paused the video was heard.
Interesting. What I was saying was it's interesting to me with this pacemaker neuron that's outside of this box or this hippocampus. Your memory isn't like pictures. You know what I mean? You can interact with your memory. It's like a three-dimensional. It's a voxel. It's four-dimensional. You can walk. You can move inside of it.
Right.
And I feel like with this pulsing, with this carrier wave, you can create a three-dimensional shape inside of it. It's what gives us the opportunity to have this voxel within. Like it. I can't explain it very well, but in my head, that makes perfect sense.
just like
It feels like you're trying to describe it, and maybe I'm wrong, but like sonar. Like that pulsing is creating that echo, that consistency. Just like if I'm knocking on a surface, those vibrations are what give me, I know this is a desk, I know it has an underside.
Maybe it's more, for me, it's more like all of this stuff, there's no proof that 3 dimensions exist yet, right? If you took everything from a vacuum, we went from grid cells to place cells to border vector cells to head direction cells. So how do you get from that to 3-dimensional space? And this, as time gets extended, that's where that 3-dimensional space comes. And this oscillation of the theta rhythm, us our memories existing inside of it, like that carrier frequency, that carrier signal, it makes sense to me that that's where all of these voxels would be, because it's creating a three-dimensional space by doing this, especially from the outside. It's creating a world that you can exist within. That's what I mean, I think.
Like any other brain rhythm, theta is not always present. Instead, it is observed under a specific physiological state, namely during periods of locomotion, which is just a fancy term for running, exploratory sniffing, and other environment-related behaviors. For example, when the animal is sitting still and grooming, theta activity in the hippocampus would be absent or really sparse. You wouldn't see this low-frequency component in the brain activity. However, when it starts to run and search for food, its hippocampus would light up with this rhythmic theta wave. And spatial navigation is closely linked to memory formation. Because when you are a mouse, for example, and you successfully find a route to a food source, it is important to memorize that route and retrieve it next time. I'd like to make an argument, which is actually the central topic of the entire video, that the main function of theta rhythm is providing a computational mechanism to construct and retrieve memory traces. Alright, let's unpack what the hell was that. Essentially, we can think of a memory as a temporal sequence of neuronal patterns activating one after another. And each one of those patterns is a collection of neuronal assemblies, which together form an integrated representation of the external world at a particular point in time. This integrated representation encodes different modalities of the experience, things like the current position, sensory cues, emotional state, social interactions, etc. Each of these modalities has a corresponding pattern of brain activity, a neuronal fingerprint, so to speak. A great example of such is the concept of plate cells. If you're interested, I have a separate video on this topic. But essentially, certain pyramidal neurons in the hippocampus show spatial specificity. Each neuron has a preferred location in the environment and fires when the animal is located in that particular patch of ground. This forms a code of physical position. But hippocampus has been shown to code non-spatial variables as well, such as sound frequency and even people identities for the case of humans. This way, every experience, every episodic memory has all of these modalities. And to form an integrated representation of external world, the brain has to link all of them together into a single picture. Theta rhythm is the mechanism to ensure that all these separate components are linked together to form a unified memory. Another computational problem is to arrange these instantaneous representations into a temporal sequence to form a meaningful memory which unfolds in time. This sequential organization, which is inherently one-dimensional, is fundamental for both spatial navigation, because each trajectory can be thought of as a sequence of place cells, and episodic memory in general. And theta rhythm helps to form a chain of representations, ensuring the correct temporal order. Now,
okay. So he's about to talk about a thought experiment, and basically the fastest way I can say this is, you have these two people, and they met at like a Joe's coffee shop. How do they meet there again, right? They could go there at different times throughout the day and hope they run into each other, right? Because you have space, right? We know we've localized where we want to be, but then how do you find each other after that? And you have to specify a time, which is like an external coordinating factor, is what he's saying here, right? Check, Raj, we're good?
Yeah.
All right.
for the exact same purpose. In the hippocampus, the theta rhythm, and in particular its phase between 0 and 360 degrees, is used as this kind of clock, an external agent which all neurons can listen to and coordinate their spiking activity. Because for the brain to link two assemblies together, such as ones representing where and with whom, spikes from their neurons should arrive at the receiver neuron in a very small time window with a short interval between each other. That way, theta oscillation provides a temporal reference frame, which neurons can use to adjust the timings of their spikes in order to carry out information transfer more effectively. And the reason why theta rhythm activates during locomotion and other exploratory behaviors is that spatial behavior means navigation and memory encoding, so we need to constantly form integrated representations of environments. In our experiment, this means that all of a sudden everyone has a lot of catching up to do with their old friends. So the global timing mechanism is recruited for hundreds of Alices and Bobs to coordinate their arrivals all over the town. It is an online state of the hippocampus. But this is only half of the story about the theta rhythm. We have successfully combined different modalities into a unified picture of the external world. So all the information about location, visual and auditory cues, social interaction is linked together. However, this representation is only a stationary snapshot of external world at some point in time, like a freeze frame when you press pause on a movie. It doesn't have any information about what happened before or what will happen in the future. And in that configuration, it is of very little use to the brain. Because what constitutes a meaningful episodic memory is the chaining of these neuronal assemblies into a temporal sequence. the same way as pressing play turns a collection of stationary frames into an engaging movie. Essentially, there are two possible mechanisms how this chaining of assemblies can happen in the brain. The first one is externally generated sequences, which arise when the incoming sensory information already has a sequential organization. For example, suppose you are walking through a corridor whose walls are colored in gradient, so in the beginning it's red, a bit further it's yellow, and so forth. In that case, visual information, which is organized as a succession of changing colors, evokes a chain of corresponding representations in the brain. Alternatively, and this is much more interesting, an assembly sequence can be driven internally, with little or no incoming sensory cues. For example, if you were to lie down, close your eyes, and recall the experience of walking through that rainbow corridor. In that case, the sequence of representations is generated by intrinsic mechanisms of the brain, connectivity patterns, and synaptic strengths between members of the assembly itself, if the activation of first assembly leads to the activation of the second, and so forth. But it turns out that theta rhythm is essential for the generation of the latter type, internally driven sequences, since abolishing theta rhythm severely affects the emergence of this type of sequential activity, which is normally observed during planning and memory retrieval. To better understand this, let's return to our thought experiment. Now suppose that all these pairwise encounters between people should happen in a strict temporal succession, like on couples therapy. First, Alice and Bob go in at 10 a.m. Then after them, Claire and Dan at 11 a.m. and so forth. In that case, time, just like before, serves to coordinate arrivals of individuals within a couple. But at the same time, external clock is used to separate different sessions in time, to ensure they happen one after another in a well-defined order. Otherwise, it would be kind of awkward if all four people would sit there at the same time. Similarly, theta rhythm provides a mechanism to arrange experiences into a temporal sequence. And just like before, it is the phase of the wave which is used as the coordination parameter. Because neurons adjust timings of their spikes to the ticking of the hippocampal clock, episodic memories can unfold in a meaningful temporal succession instead of being jumbled together. To give you a concrete example, let's discuss an important phenomenon which was discovered last century called phase precession. I've already mentioned how a path through environment can be represented as a sequential activation of place cells, specialized neurons encoding physical location. Each of those cells has a preferred patch of ground, called the place field, where it fires most actively. And when the animal enters the place field, reaches the center, and then leaves it, the firing rate of that neuron, which is just a number of spikes it spits out per second, would gradually increase, reaching the maximum value at the center of the place field, and then go down.
So this is the oh shit.
You're muted.
I get it, dude. Sometimes I'm fucking dumb. So this is like that simple thing that we're trying to do in Unreal, where as I get closer to the center, it fires more and more and more and more, and then it gets lower and lower and lower.
Right. So, just as a precursor here, and maybe you already have the answer for this, but do we know if that the theta rhythm ticking is different for each person? Because he's referenced global a few times here, or is it pretty standardized across people?
If you're talking about the hertz, it's standardized. It's 4 to 12. Okay. If you're talking about does all of our theta rhythms match up with each other, no.
And I guess I mean it in the... So, with hertz, what he's describing is the pulse strength, right? The strength of each pulse would be the hertz that it's moving at.
So,
or is that the speed?
Again, this is a Sanchez question.
It's probably the speed. Because like, if my refresh rate on my screen is 144 hertz, or if it's hertz per second, or whatever the fuck it is, I would assume it's pulses. Maybe I don't have a clue.
I don't either.
I'm just curious if if there's a direct correlation between maybe not theta in particular, but some of the brain waves of intelligence based on the pace at which your clock runs.
I see what you're saying.
If there's any correlation between that, and that's fucking crazy.
Like if you have a faster processing speed.
Yeah. Like if my refresh rate is faster on my monitor, I'm going to probably, and we're equal skilled gamers, dude, we get into a shooter, I'm probably going to win.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've just, my updates are so much faster.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have like a 30 hertz refresh rate or whatever it is, I can't remember now. Like you can't see anything. It's really mind-boggling, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, oh man, that's messing me up. I'm sorry to hijack you.
No, you're good. I had Sanchez like sit down and explain all this shit to me, but Ohm's law and like all of this stuff when it comes to electricity just fucks me up. Like the difference between amplitude and frequency still fucks with me.
I don't know even where to start with any of it, dude. Like, my knowledge of that shit is so limited.
It's rate and frequency that fucks with me, and then also phase and polarity fucks with me, because something can be polarized, like a wave can be polarized, right? So one's high and one's low, but the phase is also one's high and one's fucking low. If they're out of phase, it means that this low part isn't where this low part is relative to this other. This shit fucks with my head.
This constitutes so-called rate coding, when information about position is encoded in what neuron is spiking and with what rate. But it turns out that the phase of theta rhythm at which a neuron spikes also matters for the information transfer. This is what's known as phase coding. More specifically, if you were to record activity transfer.
I want to be very specific here. So a wave form, right, is really just a fucking circle at the end of the day. Like each full cycle, when it goes back to purple here, that's a full cycle. So that's what this circle representation here is. So it's like displacement versus distance. So there's not much displacement here. It's all happening on this left side of this circle or whatever.
Right.
Dude, this shit fucks with me. This shit blows my fucking head. That you're really just abstracting from the pulse of this fucking thing.
Yeah.
And you're creating all of these other identity things, like these.
This is the whole tempo. This is the tempo of thought, the tempo of song. Like, that's.
But it's not, for me, it's not just that. It's that the rate of this thing firing, right, tells you this. But then where it ends up. Oh, well, he hasn't got there yet. Never mind. He hasn't got there yet. I'll let him do this. I'll let him say it.
This is what's known as phase coding. More specifically, if you were to record activity of individual neurons, as well as the surrounding theta rhythm, you'd see something quite bizarre. As the animal moves through the place field of a neuron, its spikes would occur at earlier and earlier phases of theta. In other words, the phase precesses along with movement. And if you consider other place cells and look at their spiking relative to each other, you'd see that the order of spikes within one theta cycle, that is, the time window between the two peaks, recapitulates the exact order of place fields on the portion of the trajectory. Peak firing rate, which corresponds to the center of the place field, is observed at the trough of the theta wave, around 180 degrees. Recent past is represented by the firing of neurons whose place fields the animal has just left, occurs at earlier phases of theta, and the near future, spikes of neurons whose place fields the animal is only about to enter, would unfold at later phases of theta. This way, each theta cycle bears information about past, present, and future in a proper order, and as the animal moves and theta rhythm progresses, the representations would shift accordingly along the wave to maintain this time-phase relationship. You can see how theta cycle contains little temporally organized segments of experience. Supposedly, these pieces of a bigger puzzle, which are called theta sequences, are later stitched together to encode a full memory.
Do you see what I'm saying? Like, this is just the firing rate of this thing, but it's using this carrier signal to transport this fucking other data.
Right. It's being carried on that rate. That portion was really hard for me to understand, man. I don't know what the fuck he's trying to tell me. That didn't sit well. So it's within the pacing of these waves. The trough, so the 0 degree point is the now.
180. The bottom.
Okay, I thought the bottom was 0. So
0.
If we're at
so just imagine a straight line going through the middle of this. So each one of these up and down pieces, right, is a circle. So you draw a line straight through, like the theta symbol is literally a circle with a line through its upside down phi, or turned phi. Right, so theta is a circle with a fucking line straight through it. So then just draw a line straight through the middle of this waveform here. That would be 0.
Okay.
And then 180, so on and so forth.
Understood. So at the base of the wave,
Yes.
that is the now?
Yes.
That is the right in the moment. This is exactly where my touch is. All my communicatable neurons are, that's my now.
So this, when you're using the word now, I know exactly where you're confused because I'm confused too. How the fuck is this other thing firing, but it's not the now? Like,
I don't get it.
You see what I'm saying? Yeah.
I don't get it.
Yeah.
Like, so on the downward slopes, that is my past. On the upward angles, that's my future projection. But these are happening at a refresh rate that's 4 to 12?
Yeah, 4 to 12.
A second. What? I'm not doing it, dude. My brain's not getting it. Oh, fuck. Okay.
Yeah, this is where I struggled the most with all of this.
This is gonna take me to, like, rot over. Because I'm not... What the fuck is the computational data of our brain? Like, how... And they're seeing this shit in rats. So it's like this amount of information that's not being... Or is being retained over and over again to create a memory cycle.
Maybe if we watch it
Really
Theta rhythm,
fast.
at which neurons spike.
Maybe if I watch this again with that understanding. So now that it's in the middle, the now technically here.
Right.
So the now technically is this whole thing. But when
Rats
it's
moving.
in the bottom, that's where you are.
Is that the... To correlate it, is that the place cell's medium? So am I not thinking of now correctly? So when it's centered at the lowest point in the theta rhythm, is that the place cell center? That is my perfect reference point to where I am. It has nothing to do with now, has everything to do with environmental...
Yes,
Fuck.
yes and no, but at the same time it is now. Right, because there's a different when you add more place cells, it's a different
There's a different
one.
now every moment. Which is a dumb sentence because we know that, but to see it materialized is hurting me.
Yeah. So this one is firing here in the theta rhythm. This one's firing.
Yes.
So I guess the problem is that this other one, this other purple, well, actually, fuck that. We'll say the red. So the red and the orange, relative to each other, have a different frequency, and it looks like they're just. I don't want to say the wrong thing. They're just out of phase with each other. So this is the firing rate of these other ones, and then when it's you see what I'm saying? So its firing rate is here because when it's back in the like this OG yellow one, right? And if you look at where the place field firing rate is up at the top, that hill, it's only in there. It's not in any other one. And then you see the orange ones start to fire a little bit, and then when you hit the nominal or the most proximal to the middle of this place field is when it hits in the trough. But the fact that it's fucking that accurate is blowing my mind. That's the thing that blows my mind. It doesn't make any
sense. It's not sitting well with me.
Because when you go back to the beginning of the video, it's just a fucking pulse of
Correct.
it's all of the neurons firing. It's not just it's just all of them, and it's the summation of all of these things that it's just riding on top of.
Which is bizarre, dude. I don't get it. Like, so it almost looks like everything's moving through an assembly line. Because we have yellow, and then yellow's lower, yellow's center, yellow's up, yellow's almost out, yellow's out. And all of these are being, like, washed over by the wave as the rat moves through the place field. That's disgusting.
Let's now tie everything together. In this video, we explored the phenomenon of theta rhythm,
Help me.
an oscillatory pattern of brain activity, resulting from summation of individual currents flowing in the network. Basically, the theta rhythm functions as an internal hippocampal clock, helping to coordinate the firing of individual.
Oh, you see that circle up in the top there?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Right.
Individual neuronal assemblies during memory operations. This way, theta rhythm underlies cognitive chunking and storage of events in their correct spatially temporal order. In humans, similar mechanisms can be employed during the formation of semantic memories and gaining of more abstract knowledge, which brings me...
Leave the activity.
And now another part of my brain that's not functioning right. So I understand what we're getting at is that the theta rhythm is what is creating resonance of memory. It's what's aiding you in materializing the world around you. Why the fuck does so much of it fall off?
What do you mean? And leave the
Like, I can't tell you at work today some of the houses I went into what they look like in there, but I did process the house. But I can't tell you exactly where everything was in there. So why was that information just falling off of, like, why wasn't it being stored as well on this theta? I think I'm asking the wrong question.
No, I get the question that you're asking. Leave the activity, so it's just
Sure, yeah.
A friend of mine once, because I said something similar to this. A friend of mine once said, "Do you really want to think that much? Right? Why can't I control all of this stuff?"
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, do you want to think about having to breathe? Do you want to think about processing your food, so on and so forth? So then you get to this, all right, throw all the things that you don't want to fucking think about that your body already does naturally in the bottom of the barrel. So then you get to the point where, like, you start to say things like the average everyday consciousness leaves out more than it takes in. And it's, why are you paying attention to the things that you are paying attention to in the beginning? So when you're saying that these things are falling off, I feel like that's where, like, the rubber meets the road. That's the difference between the body and the mind, quote unquote. Right? So it's what, in the best way I can, the best word to describe that duality there is soul. So your soul versus your body, right? Your observer versus your robot, your mechanism, your meat sack that we are operating in, right? So for me, it's like you're paying attention to certain things because of certain experiences in your life, right? Like the sequential pattern of time, right? I'm gonna fucking go on a rant, and I apologize for this, but Hume, right? Hume wrote this big ass fucking shit about causality and whether or not causality exists, right? So imagine you have a billiard table and you see ball A hit ball B. Or did you see ball A move followed by ball B move? How can you say for sure that this caused this? Do you see what I'm saying? So he creates this entire line of skepticism where causality goes out the fucking window. Like, you can't actually prove it. Show me where causality is. Show me where the, you know what I'm saying? Like, how did that bounce? Show me why it did that. Where's the cause? And we can say, well, it's obvious, common sense, you dropped it and you hit it, so it obviously is going to do this. But when you boil it down to, like, or when you reduce it to, like, its philosophical principles, it's not as obvious as it is. But Hume's even credited saying that this isn't his philosophy isn't a philosophy of everyday use. And then Reed said something along the lines of, it's like a hobby horse you ride inside of your house, but if you brought it out into the Times Square, all of your friends would have you arrested and never leave you alone again. Right? Because it's crazy to think that way.
Right.
You can't fucking operate that way. But it is true. At the end of the day, it is a true statement to make that. So then from there, tying this back to, like, your idea of, not your idea, your statement of why can't I remember these things? It goes along with that. When we were children, this is how we were raised. This is what we saw every day. This is the causes and the effects, or the reasons why A, B, C, D, E, F, G happens is because of point 1, point 2, point 3. These are all the things and why they happen. We, on an average day or every single day, we are operating based on internal stimulus, not the external world. So you may have been in a fight with somebody, or some stressful situation was happening that was taking more of your computing power away from your observation, so you were just running on 140p resolution, not 1080p like you usually do.
Well, isn't this kind of the staging of Alan Watts' whole, like, you are omnipotent because you don't have to think? about all these subsystems, and when you do augment your power to either your physical or your observational or whatever, and you're losing all the other systems prioritization, that's the argument for omnipotence and why you are the god of your own domain. Because these functions occur not on purpose.
So Kant says something very similar to that, in the fact that when you go the full, what the fuck is it? When you go the full empiricist route, nothing is real.
Sure.
And when you go like the Kantian route, what he's trying to say at some point is, we bring things to bear. Like, you don't have direct access to reality, right? We don't know what it is. We have appearances. This is what they appear to me to be. But what he's saying is that you have a internal representation of both space and time. So you have a metric in which you force the world to be. Doesn't mean it's actually that way. And it's also, you can say the same with the visible light spectrum. There's other spectrums of light that we cannot fucking see, but because of our mechanisms, this is what we see. So what he's saying is, like, space is this way because, right, space isn't just a representation of objects relative to each other, because remove all of the objects, what's left? What is
Nothing.
that? That's fucking space. It's space. What is that?
Yeah.
And then the relationship to time, he says something in his Critique to Pure Reason that I was just reading yesterday. It said, time is the representation of the internal stimulus throughout your life. So, like, the fact that I existed today and yesterday and tomorrow, right? That sequence is our representation of time. So it is the quote-unquote soul that I was talking about a second ago, of, like, the thing inside of your body. You know what I'm saying? Because my body continues to change. I don't have full control over it. The more you become aware of, like, psychological principles. Yep. The Theta rhythm fucked me up. That whole thing fucked me up. So I need Sanchez to sit down with me and, like, go over.
I want to know the electrical side of it. I want to know what it means. I want to register what the fucking peaks and valleys actually are representing. I want to know how it's occurring.
Because he sat down with me one time and was talking, and he was explaining this stuff. And most infantry dudes, like, we know most of this, but we just know it at a different way. We're
Right.
like, we know high, medium, and low frequencies. We know what the fuck that means, because that's how they use IEDs against us, and we have to have fucking certain pieces of equipment. But what the fuck does it actually mean? Well, a low frequency can travel farther than a high frequency. A high frequency needs more power in order to project itself, propagate itself.
Yeah.
And then the question after that I didn't realize is, like, when you're using radios, when you're using frequency hop, it is frequency modulating. It is having a carrier signal, and then it fucking encrypts. How the fuck do we do that? How does that happen? So anyway.
Plug SKL in.
So the next time I'm coming on here, I'm gonna talk about wave transforms with somebody who can fucking explain this shit to me, because I don't get it. I don't fucking get it.
No.
I don't.
No. I'm excited to see that one. I want to know.
Same.